a beat trying to hold both government and corporate algorithms accountable.
Interesting. So one of the
algorithms that are responsible, it's the person who's creating the algorithms that's responsible.
And there probably aren't even enough people involved in creating the algorithms. I fully agree with you. If you look at something like Facebook and Google and the circulation of misinformation, Krishna Bharat, who's the founder of Google News, who I teach a class with here on exploring computational journalism, he's basically written that it's not an engineering challenge to slow down fake news, it's a body challenge, that they could easily devote more resources to doing that. So I fully agree with you that when you look at the earnings for Facebook and Google, it's in part because they may have $2 million revenue per employee, and if they chose to try to lower the amount of false information circulating, it would be more costly, but it would also probably be more beneficial for democracy. And that's my speech for today.
So this is the age of the algorithm then? Is that everything is going to be determined by a few people who can write these darn things, and then we all have to go along because we don't understand?
No, I think life's more like a Reese's peanut butter cup. We have data journalism and storytelling together, and that's what we teach in our master's program. Our master's program at Stanford had the highest number of applicants ever last year because we have 5 classes in data journalism and 4 classes in multimedia and 5 classes in writing. So I fully agree that it's like the hybrid model of data and storytelling together.
Who's this guy algorithm that you keep talking about?
yeah, to that end, what does a career in journalism look like? I thought that was an interesting, you all had interesting perspectives. What does it look like in the next few years, maybe like 2 to 10 years?
Well, I think the important thing is there are still careers in journalism. You know, when I'm out talking to students, and I'm on campuses a lot, because one of my sidebar occupations is I accredit journalism schools for the national organization that does that. And when I'm on campuses and have the opportunity to talk to students and talk to faculty, et cetera, the message isn't that journalism isn't dying. Yeah, okay, newspapers aren't gonna probably outlast my kids' generation, but journalism has never been better in terms of the number of people practicing it. Yeah, there's a lot of people practicing it who neither you nor I would consider credible, but there are opportunities in journalism for those who want to pursue it that have not existed previously. And when I'm talking to the students, I talk to them a lot about making sure that you have, you know, that the fundamentals of journalism, the blocking and tackling of journalism, the writing and reporting will never go out of style, and you've got to have those skills. But you've also got to have really advanced critical thinking skills and really advanced ability to consider the best way to tell a story. Because we have so many ways to tell a story. And frankly, one of the problems in most traditional, if you will, mainstream, lamestream, whatever you want to call us, newsrooms today is that we're still so wed to the print paradigm that we can't get past that to think about different ways to tell stories. And with interactivity, with multimedia, we have so many, and with data journalism and so on, we have so many different ways to conceive of stories now. And you know, and the day-to-day conversation gets to be like, sorry, I'm slightly getting off point here. The day-to-day conversation is like, why are we writing game stories anymore? But so for the next generation of journalists, there are countless possibilities and ways. There'll still be people who've done it in quasi-traditional ways like us, but there are so many people now going to nonprofits, going to startups, finding, you know, just being sole practitioners and starting up their own sites and things like that. I mean, there are a number of ways, and that's still journalism. The financial models, yeah, a little shaky in some cases, and it's not like traditional media, newspapers, television, etc. We're going to make you rich unless you're, you know, Bob Woodward or something. But the fact still remains that there are countless ways to do it, and part of every journalism major today, or related comm major, whatever you want to call it, there should be classes in entrepreneurship, because and many programs have added that in one way or another, because the students coming out are going to have to find their own ways. It's not like when I graduated and sent a bunch of letters and resumes off and got hired as a reporter. It's not going to. That still works for a lot of people, it's been a pleasure today to talk to a couple of Daily students about how to help them get along with their careers. And oh, by the way, come work for me in Detroit. But it's a lot more complicated than it used to be. But the careers are still there. They're absolutely still there. Sorry.
There's great value in becoming a curator in a world where there's so much information, overwhelming amount of information. So, for instance, anybody who's not familiar, take a look at Brian Stelter's work at CNN. He's on air, he has a fantastic daily newsletter, he does a podcast, he takes it upon himself within his sort of area of domain expertise to be the person who provides perspective and links to other things. The Axios newsletter is fantastic. 2 former ABC News producers have started a terrific female daily newsletter called The Skim. And again, the power of their curation is creating something that is brand new, necessary, and I believe the best of them are going to become real businesses and will spawn others.
Yeah, and I was just saying, you know, I have so many things to say. There will be beers later. You know, lots of businesses have gone out of business because people no longer wanted the thing they sold. And that's not the case with journalism. Our digital readership is up, I just checked with somebody, 88% in 2 years. And I look around here, I look around my own, I have 3 teenagers, voracious consumers of news. I often get most of my news from them tweeting stuff at me or texting stuff at me that they've heard before I have. My oldest son, with no input from me, is studying journalism, or not studying journalism, but working on his college paper. I think maybe you told me, and another journalism school recently told me they had more applications for a J school than they have ever had before. So there's this tremendous interest in both producing it and in receiving it. We just have to figure out how to get people to pay for it. That's the challenge we're all working on. And just to your point, Peter, the breaking for our own worlds of breaking that tie to print is just the hardest thing to get journalists who've done this for a long time to do. And I'll just give you one example, and we're changing very quickly, but about a year ago I was in one of our newsrooms, and we talk a lot about when is the right time to publish a story, right? And you always, in the print world, you're saving that big story for Sunday morning's paper, right? And so when do you do that story? It's like, well, we get it done at Friday night usually, and so we put it up then, online. And I said, well, if you were a politician and you wanted no one to know the news you were about to publish, when would you put it out? It's like, oh. And so, but those are habits that are so hard for us to break as journalists. But the pace with which people are breaking those is so fast. 2 years ago, a colleague of mine learned that the ad department was going to move on the same floor, not in the same space, but the same floor as we were on the journalism side, and she was outraged by it and thought this was like the end of journalism and it's corrupt and you can't believe these people are going to be on the same floor with us. And now she's routinely sending them ideas for events they could have and ways to monetize the journalism. So to your point, anybody who is succeeding in journalism now, whether it's the Axios people or political people or whoever, the ESPN people, are strongly entrepreneurial about how they do it and have a business literacy that I sure as hell didn't have when I was getting in journalism. You have to.
So part of the exodus from the industry is probably good news from society's perspective. You were talking about writing about Roger and me. If you think about the old days when you had hundreds of local movie reviewers, maybe you could learn more from Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb now than you would have from your local reviewers. So that might be what Schumpeter called creative destruction. But there is this side that you were talking about, mission journalism. As an economist, I would say it's the type of story that has a positive spillover or positive externality. In my book, Democracy's Detectives, I did a case study of McClatchy paper, the News and Observer, and how they invested $200,000 in a story that showed that over the course of 8 years in North Carolina, 580 people were murdered by somebody out on parole. That changed spending. The state put $10 million more into the system. They estimate that in the first year when the policy changed, 8 fewer people were murdered because of that series. Nobody rolled out of bed in the morning and said, thank you, News and Observer, for lowering the probability I will be murdered today. But if you did a full cost benefit, which I did, For each dollar invested in the story, society got several $100s in net policy benefits. That's, if the News and Observer had gotten 10% of that, they could have doubled their staff size. So the real challenge is how do you fund those stories that change lives and laws, but you can't fully monetize it all. That's what draws students, though, to our program. The people that come to the Stanford journalism program now, they know they're not going to get wealthy, but they know a couple things. They can tell a story, and that's satisfying, and they can change people's lives. And so if we can prepare them to do that with a different set of skills, that's how I think we can contribute as a university.
Yeah, no one called to thank us, I'm sure about that. I am thinking, as you were saying that on the phone call, I have to return today, and that is from a reader of the Center Daily Times in State College, Pennsylvania, who is very upset that we don't run Breitbart as one of our news services. So, that will be this afternoon for me. I don't know what you'll be doing.
At least you can say they don't syndicate it.
Right.
So one thing that I'm hearing today is that you have a much more distributed audience, right? And it may be coming in, as Tim mentioned, actually 95% of the time, it's not going to be coming in vertically. It's going to be coming in from a search and landing directly into your site. So you're getting a different kind of consumer than you used to, which is really exciting. That being said, how do we get those folks over the hurdle to actually monetize, to care? What are the different angles and tactics that you think could be effective and that we need to leverage to get more people, taking the plunge and paying?
So the Washington Post has great software. If any of you have followed their evolution, the CTO there has said that one of the things they do is they look at the article when somebody hits the paywall and then decides to subscribe, they start to focus on that. So they've been trying to figure out what makes us unique, what's our product differentiation, and when they do that, it turns out to be their investigative work, their opinion, and their politics. And so they really do a great job of not changing the journalism, but for the stories that they produce, figuring out how to title it, how to promote it on social media, and they actually franchise that software. Yeah.
About 80% of the ESPN audience is coming in on a mobile device, and that's principally a phone. So to the comments people have made about sort of weaning yourself from sort of print specific, two things. One, you have to decide, like, is every single link from a social media network or Google going to yield you a free page? Because people are trained to believe that they can get the stuff for free, so why would they pay? So that's one thing. I would argue that we should get ourselves off of that. Second, you should view any page you come into as its own homepage and think about it that way. Frequently, you come into a page, it's a story page, it has a bunch of clunky ads on it, it's not a good experience, it doesn't recognize where you're coming from, it doesn't offer you any sort of other links or places to go to get involved, it's just a story page. And then you're gone. So you have to think of those things differently. I do believe people's expectation today is, in large, that text is for free. And if you want to create a world where people are going to pay for it, you're going to have to change that perception.
I think that it's really interesting what you just said about that homepage experience. When Pandora first came out, I both loved it and was completely creeped out by it, that it knew what songs I was going to like based on 2 songs that I like. But we need that, and we don't yet have that in journalism. So we need, when you land on that page at ESPN or Sacramento Bee or whatever, to know enough about you pretty quickly in the way that Facebook does. Facebook knows a lot about you. And to know something about you so that we can show you the other things that you would be interested in. We also need to know enough about you so we can make instantaneous economic decisions about you. So if you are someone who lives in our community and we see you keep coming back, then we should work really hard to get you to subscribe. And we should use the paywall in a smart, metered way to get you to do that, and different promotions we might do. If you are like me, say, I live in Washington, D.C., super interested in Stanford football. So if I were coming to the San Francisco Chronicle constantly to read Stanford football stories, the people at the Chronicle could probably figure out that I'm never going to subscribe to the San Francisco Chronicle, but I might consume 50 pages a month with ads on them. And so they should actually loosen the paywall for me under that model and let me see a lot. And then if one of these jerks with an ad blocker comes up, he should hit the paywall before he gets to the page. But we can be a lot smarter about using the technology, and in a way, sort of borrowing some of what Facebook has done where Facebook figures out a lot about you and then serves you the things that you want to see.
Or to Jay's point, you know, the industry can begin to share effective software together. A lot of, like, the Washington Post and others have offered to license their thing, and there can't be a pride of authorship. You have to find the best ideas.
Offer to license it and sell it to you too.
But I'm just saying, I'm just saying it's all in negotiation.
Yeah, no, exactly.
But the idea that we're all trying to solve the same problem, competing with Facebook and Google, is a losing.
Yeah, no, and I'll give you an example of how this actually works. I was talking to an editor the other day at the Dallas Morning News, and they actually have fairly sophisticated software that you were talking about that you can see where people are subscribing. And, you know, there's 6 or 7 big deal college football programs in the Dallas Fort Worth area, and they saw that one of them way over-indexed for getting people to subscribe. And armed with that knowledge, the journalists were able to help. So we'll put 2 reporters on that team rather than 1 reporter, because we can further the business side of the operation by doing that and build in the funding that will sustain us. We need those kind of tools so that we can do our part to help get us there.
It's really interesting what, you know, there's some battle in the industry for the hearts and minds of journalists as it pertains to metrics and what.
I have no idea what you're talking
about. Yeah, and what they tell us. Example, I was talking to our University of Michigan beat reporter the other day, mainly to hear Harbaugh stories, I admit, but he was telling me, this is something that we as Stanford alums would never understand. His audience actually goes up when they lose, because there's an expectation at the University of Michigan that they're going to win. And they're apoplectic right now because they're only 7-2. And of course, here, even with the last decade, there are many of us who are dancing happy dances when we have a winning season and go to a bowl game. So, although I must admit my expectations are higher, and I will admit I was yelling at the television about the play calling during the Washington State game. But beyond that, I'm as crazy about this as Tim is. I've been a season ticket holder since 1977, so I've seen a lot of really bad college football. But in our newsrooms, there's still, it's part of the print paradigm that I was talking about a little bit before. There's still some reluctance to embrace metrics because they figure they're just going to end up writing, you know, the cliche is cat videos, right? And because we've all spent too much time watching cat videos on Facebook. But and I don't even like cats. I'm a dog guy. But so we have to continue to work with our newsrooms to get them to understand that the metrics help us. We're not going to fall them off a cliff. We're not going to suspend our judgment. We're not going to stop doing investigative reporting that isn't going to get as much audience as a sports story. Or you know, we got 1 million page views a couple of weeks ago, a story about a couple that was caught having sex on a flight from Detroit to Detroit from LA. Of course, they were coming from LA, but
I think we got 1 million page views for that story too.
Yeah, and, you know, as I'm fond of saying, we'll take the gifts for the learning that we get from the metrics. If we see a story on K through 12 schools in Detroit isn't doing well, then we have the opportunity to ask ourselves, okay, what are we not doing right in covering education? Why aren't we reaching people about this? Because everybody cares about education, right? Especially in an economically distressed city like Detroit. So all of these tools that we have today, we still have some hurdles to get over to get them employed in an effective way, because ultimately they're a help. For all the reasons we just heard, they help our economic model. They help us focus our resources. They help us guide our reporters. It doesn't replace judgment. It doesn't replace, hey, we got to do that, because if we don't do that, nobody else is going to do that. That's still a huge part of what we do as journalists. But if we're going to succeed economically and take advantage of this sideways audience that's coming in from search and social and everything else, everybody's metrics are the same as to what Tim was saying. Everybody's, I don't think our number's 95, but it's close, that are coming in through search and social, not coming in through just typing in freepress.com.
And just to put a fine point on the degree of the problem, everywhere I worked in digital journalism, four places now, roughly 20% of the journalism has drawn about 80% of the readership. Right. Probably same at ESPN, right? Which means every day journalists across the country write thousands and thousands of stories that virtually no one reads. And And if any other business did that, it would no longer be a business, right? If Coke doesn't, like, I don't know what Coke produces, but they don't randomly sell, you know, the cherry Coke and the lemon Coke and the whatever, and if the store dumps half of it in the dumpster every day, no one ever buys a lemon Coke, they just don't keep selling the same amount of lemon, producing the same amount of lemon Coke every day. They make decisions about that, and we have to be smarter about making decisions. And it's not the case that when you get down to that list of stories that nobody reads, that they're the profound stories that got the mayor indicted or that changed the law. They're stories that you wouldn't have read either if you hadn't written them. Mike Allen, who's now at Axios, a friend from Politico, used to have a checklist of questions you should ask yourself before writing a story. And it was a Washington-based one, so it was sort of Washington-focused, but would a TV booker book a segment based on this story? Would a member of Congress introduce a bill? Would someone buy or sell a stock based on it? And as he always said, like, the lowest bar question was one that we still would usually answer no, as would you read this story if you hadn't written it yourself? So we have to. Sometimes that algorithm, that reporter algorithm seemed like kind of a good idea.
About 5 years ago, Saturday afternoon in April, we had the start of an NBA playoff series between the Knicks and Cavaliers. And we had this beautiful photo of Carmelo Anthony and LeBron James. The game was on ABC, which is also part of Disney. And it looked like a perfect homepage. Marquee matchup, great picture. When we looked at Chartbeat, which is one of the tools we use to chart traffic, there was one problem, which was that there was 3 times the traffic going to the 3rd day of the NFL draft, even though we were leading with that piece. And because we do look at the metrics and care about them, we didn't take the main story off its placement, because we're also promoting a television broadcast, but we did double box and put a big thing to the 3rd day of the NFL draft. We made a note to ourselves for the next year, because sports is very, very repetitive. But you have no choice but to look at the numbers, and I think the combination of brilliant people and good systems gets you to a better place.
One of my colleagues asked something she says a lot in our training sessions, that the job of a journalist is not to write stories. The job of the journalist is to convey information to people. And if people aren't actually reading the stories, then in no meaningful sense have you done the job of a journalist. Or can you claim that you're providing a public service or serving a public interest? You fail. So we have to connect those things.
Two things actually. Have you thought about like the Spotify model rather than having paywalls for individual papers? I mean, I subscribe to the New York Times, but you know, I can't pay for also Washington Post. And if I'm banned, you know, so it's having more of a kind of a gather together and having it that way. And then when I thought about also the writing stories you don't read, how do you actually, if people don't come to a front page, since we don't have that editorial role anymore, that's a problem as for society, because I may not actually I may not know research on some thing about cancer when it may actually be relevant to me, right? So the issue is really that there isn't any way of someone, what I get from the New York Times front page, someone telling me, hey, pay attention to this, right? So if I come as a consumer, that's a big problem.
Right. What we've lost, obviously, is that sort of well-rounded knowledge, and that the story you might read because it's next to the story you're actually interested in when you're returning the pages. That we've lost that completely. But we, as journalists, work incredibly hard to figure out how to get those stories to the people who are interested in them, and whether it's doing the search engine optimization well, or making sure the social headline is right, and we write the perfect share text on Facebook so that it's going to end up in your news feed. Like, that's a huge part of not just the social media person's job, but every reporter's job now in America. They have to do those things. Because you're right, you're not going to stumble across a story. We have to make sure it gets to you.
Does the size of the headline make any difference these days?
Well, the content of the headline certainly does. You know, again, like the size, if most of your audience is actually reading your paper on a phone, then the size of the headline isn't as important. But the content of what's in there, and you see, like The Economist, for instance, will write 15 different headlines for a particular story. They will deploy them different places, and they'll do A/B testing to figure out over time what works best where. And the answer is different things.
Right. The headline, we tell our reporters, the headline is the new lead. Because, you know, Facebook is this strangely democratizing thing. There is no different size headline. Everyone gets that same box that's this big, and the New York Times gets that box, and the Center Daily Times gets that box. And what you put in it, that picture, the line of share text and that headline is your only chance to get that reader. And you know, in the print days, if someone got the paper, there was a real service to them if they if they skimmed the headlines on the front page. And that was okay with us because at that point they had paid for the newspaper. We actually didn't really care what you do with the newspaper once you pay for it. If they skim your headline on Facebook and they don't stop and click, we get nothing. And so that's not okay with us. So it's changed the entire way you write headlines, the entire way you package stories, because you've got to get people to do something to come actually read it.
When we say Johnson scored 3 touchdowns, which is the normal style that we've had, it doesn't tell you very much, and in sophisticated systems that run algorithms to connect headlines to stories that people might be interested in, it doesn't register if you didn't say Billy Johnson, okay? But you might not have done it because you have a convention of how much space you're going to devote to different things. You really have to think about the contents of the headline and where they're going to go.
And if you say Billy Johnson scored 3 touchdowns, you might have just told the reader all he needs to know, and he's never going to click on the story. And so that's the crazy, the headlines that you all hate of the blah, 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 you'll never guess what happened next. That's because someone is dying to try to get you to come find out what happened next. And if you tell them that on the headline, they're never going to come to the story.
Hopefully they're teaching this in the journalism department now.
I'm sure they are. Sure.
Great, well thank you, especially for the audience engagement, that was awesome. And I believe our panelists will be joining for cocktails later, so if anyone has follow-up questions, please keep the conversation going. Thank everybody.